senators who put their name to this should be embarrassed that they have signed up for repealing the free speech amendments of the First Amendment. Thank you.
The statements have been completed, and I wonder if Senator McKissick and Mr. Abrams and Professor Raskin could join us at the appropriate places on the table. The first witness blew. You know, it does a... Officer, please remove the man holding up the sign contrary to the rulings of the chair. Senator McKissick, the story of our Constitution has been one of progressive inclusion, as I read it. In fact, many of our founding fathers believed only white landowners should be allowed to participate in our elections. Each generation of Americans has expanded on the promise of our founding and the march toward a more perfect union. We've amended the Constitution many times to ensure our representative democracy.
There are organizations in Washington that say they want to limit the role or influence of money in politics. Is that goal consistent with the First Amendment?
Well, I think what they're really saying is that they want to limit the speech that money allows. I mean, when people complain that there's going to be more of this and more of that, or that the speech will contain falsehoods, or that politicians or others will be accused in ways that they find uncongenial, what they're really saying is that the money is doing bad things, and that is at its core inconsistent with the First Amendment. The First Amendment favors speech. It favors more rather than less speech. It favors speech from diverse sources. It rejects the notion that speech can be constrained or limited because one person has more than another person. I mean, all of that comes with the First Amendment, and so a general denunciation of money in politics is really a denunciation of politics itself and of the public debate that we have in politics.
Yeah. My next question deals with a point you made in your opening remarks, and I ask it only in a way of giving you an opportunity to emphasize what I think is a very important point. Supporters of the proposed amendment think that it's needed to prevent wealthy donors from drowning out ordinary citizens and to restore democracy. Could you elaborate on how this position is fundamentally at odds with the Constitutional protection of free speech?
Yes, when somebody says that my speech will drown out someone else's speech, and therefore I should say less, it is the functional equivalent of telling a newspaper you really ought to have fewer editorials. You really shouldn't spend your space denouncing one candidate for office. It's just not fair. You have too much power. I grew up at a time when Democrats, Adlai Stevenson, was running against the one-party press. Every newspaper was Republican, just about everyone in those days. No one would have thought that the answer to the so-called one-party press was saying the press can't print something, or they're printing too much, or they're drowning out the opposition. That comes on the menu of the First Amendment, and that menu includes as much speech as one wants.
Mr. Abrams, I'm not the only one who believes that you're the leading First Amendment lawyer in the country. You have, and you're not a member of my party either.
That's true, not yet.
I like the thought. We're very privileged to have you here today, and we're grateful to have you other witnesses as well. Now, Mr. Abrams, this is not the first constitutional amendment proposed to restrict political speech. This one, however, goes beyond what we've seen in the past. As far as I can tell, for example, Senate Joint Resolution 19 is the first one for the purpose of achieving what it calls political equality. Under this amendment, the government could constitutionally redefine political equality and decide whose speech must be suppressed or should be suppressed or allowed in order to achieve it. Isn't this at odds with America's entire history regarding government control of speech?
Well, it is. It gives enormous power to the legislatures, to Congress, and to the states to enforce the law. And I would assume that the courts would be very deferential to anything that those legislatures did. And that being said, while there might be an equal protection or other arguments made, I really believe that an amendment of this breadth would change substantially and in a irrevocable way, except another constitutional amendment, the whole nature of American society as a speech-protecting society.
Well, another difference is that this amendment will give the government authority to control not only money, but also what it calls in-kind equivalence.
Yeah.
Like the notion of political equality, this is something completely new. Now, it appears to me that the government will be able, or if this amendment passes, will be able to define this category however it wants, and therefore control of whatever, they'd be able to control whatever government wants. Now, how far do you think this new dimension of regulation extends, and do you expect there would have to be litigation to figure out how it applies?
Oh, there's no doubt of that. There would have to be enormous litigation. I mean, look, the reality is, how shall I say this to members of Congress here, if you provide the Congress or state legislatures with power, they're likely to use it.
Right.
And they're likely to use it in this area in a speech-destructive way. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about. I mean, I understand the argument of equality, that more people, few people have great wealth, that wealth gives more power, as has been said. But the effect of this amendment would be to embody into our law, by changing, substantively changing and limiting the First Amendment in a way in which, at the least, we're going to have years and years of litigation. But I fear worse. I don't mind that personally. But what we are going to have beyond that is a significantly diminished ability to have the sort of ongoing confrontations at length that we have in our electoral process. I mean, 2012 election, in my view, was a good example of the system working. There was lots of money out there. There was lots of speech. People heard, sometimes more than they wanted to, but they heard the views of the parties and had a chance to vote. That's the way the system ought to work, and that's threatened by this legislation, this amendment.
And have a lot of money drowning out the voices of the others. When John Stuart Mill said the answer to restrictions of speech is more speech, he didn't mean just from one side. And the world didn't exist that way then, but it exists now. Then Senator Cruz said Americans would gasp if they heard what Democrats are trying to do. I'll tell you what makes the American people gasp is that a small handful of people can have huge effect on our political system, and not just defending incumbents. What a canard that is. Most of the money that has come from the super PACs and from many of these groups are knocking out incumbents, particularly those from the other side, whether they be Republican or Democrat. Senator Cruz says that we should be embarrassed about this amendment. I'll tell you, Senator Cruz, it makes it seem like if you support this amendment, you're against the First Amendment. Well, I want to ask you, Senator Cruz, are you against anti-child pornography laws? He's not here. But would he be against anti-child pornography laws? Does that make him against the First Amendment? Is he an absolutist on the First Amendment? Bible laws? Does that mean you're against free speech and you're against the First Amendment? Absolutely not. Yeah, you can get on your soapbox and distribute a leaflet and answer it, but in the way our political system works, test. It did then, it does now. And if there ever is a balance that is needed, it is to restore some semblance of one person, one vote, some of the equality that the Founding Fathers sought in our political system. I've gone over my time because I was a little bit excited.